Welcome. Welcome to our Hangout series, Innovation by Design. It's really designed for innovation and design thinking leaders to share what's working for them, as well as tips on how you can help others be more successful. And today, our Hangout is specifically about understanding how design thinkers think. Before we jump in, what I'd like to do is just a little bit of housekeeping to make sure you know what to expect over the next hour. So we'll have about 45 minutes of a great dialogue with our excellent panelists. And then what we'll do is we'll take your questions. So please be sure to go into the questions and answers tab and either enter your questions or vote on other questions. We'll make sure that we get to the questions that have the most votes. And if we can, we'll get to all of them. So again, we'll take the questions at the end for about 10 to 15 minutes. There's also polls. If you complete the polls, they help our panelists really know how to tailor the answers to their questions, depending on how deep you are into design thinking. Or if you're just getting started, they'll know to try to make sure to clarify everything that they're saying. But we do have folks standing by on Twitter at Altitude Inc. or Altitude_Inc. Hashtag Innovation by Design, hashtag Design Thinking. So please do engage in the conversation today. We'd love to hear from you and we welcome any feedback. And the question that I get often is, will you get the record? So the answer is yes, you will get the record. It will come on Monday. You will get a link to the record through email on Monday. And with that, let's go ahead and jump in. For a little bit of background, as Harvard Business Review recently stated, design thinking is coming of age. It's definitely the buzz, people talking a lot about it, but to effectively adopt and utilize design thinking for innovation, you really need to understand its mindset, not just the process. So today we have three stellar panelists from Bose, GE, and Eastman, all who are experts in design thinking and innovation. And on today's Hangout, we'll explore the fundamental principles of design thinking, really giving you the frameworks you need to discuss, integrate, and embrace within the organization. So I'm very, very excited, truly, to introduce our panelists. Let's start first with Mark Cisco. Hello, Mark, who is America's Regional Manager and Global Design Director of Design Thinking for GE Healthcare. GE Healthcare delivers transformational medical technologies and services to really deliver better patient care. So GE Healthcare's global design team has embraced design thinking to not only creatively design new products, but also really engage a large portion of its employees using the tools of empathy to craft better solutions across a wide range of external and internal challenges. And we have Farrell Calabrese, who is creative manager at Eastman. Eastman is a specialty chemical company focused on creating consistent, superior value through innovative solutions. Farrell has direct responsibility for Eastman Innovation Lab, a space dedicated to advancing innovation by helping industrial design communities understand why hashtag materials matter. Farrell is an entrepreneur spirit at heart. Oh, there she goes. And really works a lot in B2B corporate environment. And we have Deborah Rich. Deborah is user experience advanced development lead at Bose. Bose has been designing, developing, and selling audio equipment since 1964. Wow. Deborah has been developing products for over 20 years, and her work is really focused on the user experience, which you'll hear a lot about today, for both hardware and software platforms. She's also a lecturer with Tufts Gordon Institute and teaching experience design management for professionals who are really pursuing their degree in engineering management. And I am Gretchen Hoffman. I'm Vice President of Marketing at Altitude. Altitude, you may have heard, has recently been purchased by Accenture. We're an innovation design consulting firm who has companies, or I should say clients work with us like Under Armour, Nike, Colgate, DeWalt, Thermo Scientific, and more. But now you're here for understanding how design thinkers think. So let's jump in and hear from our panelists. So Deborah, let's start though. Again, I mentioned earlier that we have folks at different stages really of how in depth they've gone in design thinking. So let's first start off by just defining design thinking.
So I really try to break it up. There are 4, in my mind, components. So it's not necessarily in this order, but there's an extensive amount of research. And then there's sort of ideation. There's an ideation component where you allow your brain to do what we call divergent thinking. And then there's a collaborative aspect to it. So I think every great design thinker likes thinking partners and shares ideas for building upon those ideas. And finally, the last component is iteration. So I don't think design thinkers believe that they come up with a solution and it's ready to go. I think the belief is that you continue to iterate and improve as it goes. I hope that helps frame the situation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's a good way to sort of map it out. I think for us in particular, that first step, in the research phase, focusing on empathy for users, and in our case, for patients, is really a key component for us.
Excellent, excellent. So Mark, while we have you, what are the key principles of a design thinking approach? Maybe name a few.
A few. Well, at GE, we've kind of defined about 7 of them, but I'll give you a couple top ones. Relative to what I just mentioned, focusing on human values is a really key component for us. You really need to start with your user and understand what they're trying to accomplish, and have empathy for that. Another one that I like in the process is show, don't tell. I was at a conference recently, and we were doing some workouts, some exercises in design thinking, and even designers in a group of designers have a tendency to sit around and talk about things. And one of the things we like to say too is, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. And use the tools that you have as designers to visualize. So I think showing somebody something is more powerful than just telling them something.
Yeah. Deborah.
So those are a couple.
Yep, no, those are great ones. Definitely empathizing. So,
yeah.
Deborah, do you have any to add?
I just, building on the empathizing, a lot of people think that it's sympathizing or having compassion, and that is absolutely not the same. There are some very rigorous and structured methodologies as a user experience person that we employ, especially out in the field, to ensure that we understand the user's motivations, their emotional states, the jobs that they need to have done, and that type of thing. So that you can't overstate that, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Design thinking tackles such a complex problem, and as Mark said, the empathizing, understanding the human, aspect, and really putting the user at the hub is really key. I think redefining or reframing and redefining the problem in a human-centric way is key. And then, the ideating, then prototyping, then testing. It's so important. And I think as everybody talks about iterating, right? Really make sure that, you're continuing to not just deliver and be done, but continuing to improve on addressing the user needs.
And any great author has, the famous quote, all great writing is rewriting, 90% rewriting. So it's the same for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like yeah,
I love that.
Yeah. Good. I need that.
Yeah. I forget who said it.
Oh, well,
you did.
It was
It was not you.
Okay, I'll take it.
So, Pharrell, how about, could you talk to us a little bit on how design thinking is different from other approaches, and then how are they similar?
Yeah, so just basically the same as Mark and Deborah were talking about. I think empathy is kind of what separates it. When you think about design thinking and innovation, I think they go hand in hand. But really, for me, I believe innovation is kind of the outcome, right? It is the iteration process and kind of what you bring to commercialization. So the way we approach innovation at Eastman is maybe a little bit different, but maybe not so much in other ways, but it's very R&D focused, so engineering minded. Other companies might have that front end that's a little bit more design thinking focused. So I think when a company is looking to make, changes that have big outcomes, we like to say small hinges swing big doors sometimes. that's where design thinking can really differentiate. Otherwise, sometimes you're making incremental changes that can also have big outcomes, and that's still innovation. But I don't know if the design thinking process is widely used for us in that capacity.
Excellent. Mark, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we all work at sort of, big corporations. So there's a tendency to create a lot of different processes, particularly around innovation. So there's all different flavors of it. I think, again, what distinguishes design thinking a lot is spending a lot of time with, with humans up front, and trying to understand their needs. Because I've seen some other ones where it's like, take your first great idea, just go prototype that and test it. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just that, it would be nice if that was a little bit more informed ahead of time. We spend a lot of time reframing challenges, so what is this really the problem we're trying to solve? And there's a tendency to rush towards a solution because a lot of us are really good at execution. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think if, sorry, I'm going to hit you a lot of our sort of expressions. We like to talk about slowing down to go fast later. So if we can just sort of pause, spend a little bit of time, make sure we're solving the right challenge, understand what the needs are, and then it'll just accelerate at the end because you'll know you're on the right path.
That's such a great point, because quite often we'll find that the problem people think they're solving is really a symptom. It's not the actual root problem.
Great point. By the way, all these little, quick sayings are great because we'll grab them on Twitter. So thank you.
I should hashtag them. Well, someone will hashtag them for me, right? Okay.
Exactly. So, Mark, also, how about talking a little bit about design thinking examples and how they're different from traditional approaches?
Sure. The one that we lean on quite a bit in my group in global design here in GE is one that you can find out there if you Google it. It's our pediatric adventure series solution. So I've shared this before. If you want to see a really great background on it, a guy that works for me, Doug Dietz, did a TED talk on it. But essentially, it's a good example because Doug was in a hospital and saw, I won't go into the whole story, but he saw a little girl crying as she was about to have an MRI exam. And he quite honestly, he had this epiphany. He felt like a failure as a designer because he was there to install a beautiful piece of equipment and didn't really think about this little girl as a user. And so she's crying in front of her parents, and the dad's trying to convince her. He's like, look, we talked about this. You're good. You need to be brave, right? And as I'm sure a lot of us are parents. I mean, you can really empathize with that kind of situation in terms of trying to convince your child to go through what often is a scary medical exam, and it's even worse for little kids. With that, he started to think about, well, what can I do here? And through several sort of iterations and thinking about it, we kind of arrived at this point is, I don't want to just redesign the scanner itself. I want to redesign the conversation and the car ride home. So think about it. That's quite a leap, and you don't arrive at places like that rapidly, easily, and certainly in an engineering context and a Six Sigma process, you probably wouldn't arrive at that as a criteria. How do I change that conversation in the car ride home between a child and the parent? So he conceptualized this idea called the Adventure Series, and it was really about how can I immerse the child in an adventure? Can I rationalize this exam? So we have MRI machines that make a loud clanking kind of noise. And he said, well, let's reconceptualize that as a space adventure. You're going through hyperspace. So you tell little Johnny or Sally, when you go through hyperspace, you're going to hear this noise and you're going really fast. So hold still. Or you're going through a coral reef, so hold still, while you're on the submarine and you don't want to hit the coral reef. So it's a really dynamic thing. And what I love about the solution that Doug and others came up with was we just decorated the equipment. We put stickers on it, and it looks like a coral reef or it looks like a pirate ship, and it works. And you tell the kid that story. So no new technology. We have a lot of wonderful technology, but by literally wrapping it in a story, made it much more engaging. And I think that's a really powerful example, because I don't think we would have gotten there had we not reframed what we were trying to solve.
Wow, talk about a story with great empathy. You know, how that's, wow, definitely very memorable. You know, it's interesting. We had another one at Altitude, another example of design thinking when Colgate hired Altitude, was really to restore their leadership position in electric toothbrushes. And we used the human-centered design approach. Obviously, that's what we're all talking about. But it was really used to understand, you know, how do you get a better fit? How do you make it more effective? How do you make it longer lasting? You know, and really we did a lot to observe how people were using toothbrushes, right? And it was really interesting. We ended up coming out with developing the Motion, which was a high-powered toothbrush with the dual oscillating heads. And what people really wanted was, you know, ergonomics. It was at the time when everyone was like, oh, I need everything to brush my teeth twice a day. I need to make sure the neck, you know, of my toothbrush is perfect ergonomically, you know, which is not something we would have thought of without constantly hearing that from them. And by putting the user first here, we really were able to show the empathy for what they truly wanted. And frankly, it did move Colgate back to the leadership position in the electric toothbrush category. And, you know, if we'd not gone out and talked to users, ergonomics wouldn't have been the first thing that we would have thought about in designing the toothbrushes.
But he also brought up a great point, like the user experience with your product or service begins way before they touch your product or service. And it continues when they've completed whatever you believe the end of that process is. So it has, you know, there's precursors and then it has lasting effects. And you need to study the entire thing. Yeah. You can't just look at, you know, how they interact at that moment.
I was just going to say, and I love that storytelling is such a big part of that, because storytelling is such a big part of what we do. And I think just that framing, like you had talked about, really framing that experience and telling that whole journey front to end is also really important.
Yeah, I think it's key, and also making sure that you're not ending it with the delivered product. You continue, right? You know, and continue to improve. So, Pharrell, when companies should use a design thinking approach to innovation, when should they use it, I should say, and then really, how do they know they use design thinking versus traditional approaches?
Well, I think, you know, the example that Mark just gave is brilliant. You know, when you're thinking and framing something in a design thinking way, it's not necessarily a commercialized product that's the outcome, it's the experience. Now, granted, I think innovation can sometimes be wrapped up in that too, but I think all the things that we're talking about here is just that methodology of creative problem solving. And so, you know, when should companies use design thinking over traditional innovation approaches? I mean, for me, I'm an advocate of always using it and trying to get to the heart of what the problem is. But I think if people don't have that methodology embedded into their company or their department, you know, companies that maybe are looking to be more disruptive should definitely start internalizing that type of methodology in design thinking. But I think once it's embedded in the organization, you know, no matter what you're going to do, you're going to have better outcomes because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, is there anything you want to add after your great story?
Okay. Yeah, I think I hate to say it, but sometimes it kind of depends, you know. But in some instances, you've exhausted all their possibilities. I'd have to admit that when sometimes teams come to us, they've exhausted other routes and they feel like they're still not breaking through. So that's when it's maybe a good place to sort of, you know, showcase the power of design thinking. I would love it if we used it on everything, but in some instances it's probably not appropriate. Again, like I mentioned, you know, GE was a big proponent of Six Sigma years ago, and relative to fixing quality issues and stuff like that, that's more appropriate. We're not going to, you know, probably apply design thinking there. And we've had a little bit of humility. I had a lot of conversations with folks in our HR group. You know, because we use design thinking on ourselves. We use it within the organization, you know, and helping teams become better teams, essentially. And so it has that kind of ability to it, at least for us in an evolved state. So it's not just, we don't just use it for product innovations, but it took a little bit of time to sort of evolve to that kind of state.
Excellent. So just before we move forward, I just want to make sure anyone who joined late that you're at the right hangout. It's understanding how design thinkers think. And we have Eastman, Bose, and also GE with us today, sharing their insights. And we also have folks engaged on Twitter, if you'd like to engage in the conversation, at altitude_inc and hashtag design thinking. So, and if you'd like to submit any questions, please note the questions and answers tab and submit your questions or vote on others. We will take those in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So, doing a little shift here. Since we're talking about design thinkers, let's talk a little bit about them specifically on characteristics, right? So really, what makes up a great design thinker? And Deborah, would you like to jump in there?
Sure. There are a couple things that we haven't mentioned yet that I'd like to mention. One is passion, especially when you're dealing with a culture that may not be very familiar with design thinking or may not understand how it works. You, as a design thinker, have to have a tremendous amount of passion, not only to forward the state of the art within your corporation, but also you are sometimes the only voice of the customer. Mm. So when there are business requirements and, profits that need to be made and quarterly, this and that, sometimes the real needs of the customers get lost. And it's incumbent upon you to ensure that that doesn't happen and to translate their needs with a little bit of fire. And that comes to the next thing that I think Farrell already mentioned, which is storytelling. Mm. So you need to tell a story. The human brain is wired to receive, understand, and emotionally connect in a story format. So telling the story of your user to your corporate partners, telling the story of your product to your users. So it works in both directions. Yeah. And those are two that I just wanted to bring up, and I'll let Farrell and Mark elaborate.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with the storytelling aspect. I think some of the brands that do the best job or in the design thinkers within them, they at the end of the day are very good storytellers. I think they're good listeners too, right? So I think kind of all of that journey starts with that listening first. You can't just have that solution in your head. You might already kind of be jumping to solutions, but you have to really back up and listen and reframe the problem. And sometimes it's reframing the story in your own mind too. You kind of have laid it all out. We're all kind of visual thinkers probably. And so you kind of are iterating in your head before you even get there, but really kind of backing up, truly being an active listener and getting there. And then I think for me too, some of the best design thinkers that I have connected with, they read a lot. They're connecting the dots. They're not just focused in their industry. They kind of like to know what's going on in lots of different industries, and then they can pull something they read over here and kind of connect it to something over here that totally could have stayed in separate worlds. So I think that those, for me, that insightfulness is what makes good design thinkers.
Mark, anything you want to add, or is it covered?
Wow, I mean, those are such good ones. Yeah, I mean, I think with the storytelling is a great aspect piece. Like I told you the story earlier, and I think those are ways you pass those things on. One thing that I would add maybe is one thing we call creative confidence, and I think Tom Kiley wrote about this a little bit. And use Doug, who works for me, as an example. And I think there's a little bit of that bravery, that courage in terms of operating a little bit differently, maybe than within your sort of corporate confines, at least for us, to have that bravery and that confidence to sort of share ideas with somebody and engage them in it, right? Yeah. So how do I draw them in and help make this a we activity and not just a me activity? Mm-hmm. And I think really good design thinkers are very good at doing that, drawing people in and getting them to work together.
Yeah,
it's amazing when you really think about all the characteristics of a design thinker. A lot of them are what we all wish we which we work too, right? We all want to say we're open-minded, passionate, we have empathy, we're versatile, and so it's a great way to really look into yourself too, right? And say, okay, am I really doing these things? It's eating your own dog food, like you were saying, Mark. G actually practices design thinking, right? And checking in with yourself as a company or individual. Are you doing these things?
So, and
okay, I haven't heard it referred to as eating your own dog food. Okay,
that's a very common. So
that's going to be on Twitter.
So that reminded me that the whole open-mindedness. Now, it's not like you're born open-minded, or maybe you are and society kills it. I don't care or no. But if you're not, you can be okay with that. You can say, okay, these are my assumptions. These are my beliefs. And as long as you document them and have a willingness to challenge them, and even I love a good argument. And I think a design thinker should love a good argument, because I want someone to challenge me. Because where's the fun in just wandering through life thinking you know everything? So I think that, I may or may not be open-minded. I don't know, and I don't care, but I like a good argument, so let's go.
Well, and I think to that point, it's just, it's always pushing to make something better, always seeing the opportunity. Nothing is ever good enough. You see this, you can be anywhere. If you're a good design thinker, you could be having an experience in a line in Target or something. I'm not having bad experiences there. I'm just throwing out a random brand, but
Oops.
No. But you could be really anywhere and see these opportunities. And I think the design thinkers are always, building on that, like you said, and it's always just making these connections and how can this be better, and not accepting things for what they are and having it be the status quo, I think is also a huge component of that.
It's interesting. Deborah and I were talking before about really how can an individual become a better design thinker, right? And I think you're touching on some of those. But Deborah, I thought you had some good points. Maybe you could jump to that in terms of really how can you make yourself a better design thinker?
Yes, so Mark actually brought up a good one, and that's being bold and risk-taking. Yeah. And that is not something, especially in the engineering world, that you see or I see a lot of. And this is where I lose all business cred. So I'm just going to give my cheap piece of advice.
Do it.
Take an improv class or 10. It is a very good way to learn to listen to others. It's a very good way to learn to collaborate. It's an extremely good way to learn storytelling. And finally, you will fail spectacularly on the stage. And you have got to suck it up, Buttercup, because you can't take yourself so seriously that you're afraid to do that. Yeah. You have to throw out those bizarre concepts for the benefit of the user. That has to be, those weird ideas need to be considered because they might lead to something that actually works.
Yeah,
cool.
Great points. Really good. So let's jump to really specifically for these incredibly versatile design thinkers and open-minded and everything else and bold. How are they organizing and defining and solving the problem? Deborah, maybe you could just continue a little on this line.
Yeah, so organization is a weird word for me because I am sort of scattered and cluttered. But there is that initial immersion phase. So just whatever the problem set is, whatever the context of use is, you have to jump in with both feet. And there are many different ways to do that. You can do a literature review. You can do online searches. You can, of course, I do field work. We go out in the field and watch people. And, we're the creepy people sitting in the store watching people. But
not the target.
No, that's a perfect experience. In their homes, throughout the day, interviewing. So just jump in with both feet and really try to understand the problem space without assuming the problem space. You can write down your assumptions, put them to one side, and then jump in and sort of bathe yourself in it. So that to me is the very first step. And then you come up with new hypotheses. Like based on these observations, this research, I believe these 7 things. Then you can go about doing more research validating and designing things to address the issues you believe you're seeing. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So as we're talking about this, let's talk a little more about how can companies really identify their design thinkers. We've talked a little bit about what they need to do, what the characteristics are, but Pharrell, what would you say would be the best way companies could find out who these folks are?
I mean, really just building on the things we've been talking about, that bold person who's passionate, who maybe floats around different departments too, or it has interests not just in their own kind of area. Always bringing ideas to the table, always asking why, the guy that questions everything that half the room finds annoying. It happens. So, but they go above and beyond to really figure out what the opportunities are, or they see an opportunity and it's not in their job scope and they just start working on it. That happens, I think, a lot. And that just goes back to that passion, right? Something lit a fire for them. They want to kind of see that through. And it's not necessarily about just kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's and getting their job done and going home. They're really looking to do something, in my experience.
Great points. Mark, let's pull you back in the conversation here. Should design thinkers really be from outside the company? Like, should they be outsiders to a company's process, or is internal better, or both?
Wow, that's a good question because it depends on probably the culture within the organization. I think if there's a mature design community, and I think I should probably clarify. I mean, design thinking is not just for designers. In the past, I felt like by calling it design thinking sometimes does a disservice to it, but because there's really, I've worked with folks that do research in the past, great design thinkers or human factors. Well, a lot of times we have to think, people bring their own superpowers to it, but if it's not very mature and then within the company culture, they don't really understand design and kind of the approach, it might be better to go outside. You go to those experts that are out there and bring them in. Because you'll get educated a little bit more on it. I think if a lot of times we say you don't want to outsource understanding, so for certain critical things, it would be probably better that you build that capability internally. If this is like your business strategy going forward, you might not want to necessarily expose that to the outsider, or you want people to internalize that and own it. So. I've been, both at GE and at P&G, where we built a design thinking community as well. So it helps to do that. It takes a little bit of time, especially to sort of shift that kind of a approach. But if you've got commitment, and I think I saw a question that's probably coming up about executive sort of leadership and commitment. I think that certainly helps. When I was at P&G, A.G. Lafley was the CEO. He fully bought into the Harvard Business Review article and said, hey, we're doing this. So you had kind of like permission to go do it. At GE, we sort of built it up, not necessarily, from the ground, I guess a little bit more from the ground up, and we're convincing people that way. But now we're starting to get a little bit more recognition from folks at a higher level that, hey, you guys are on to something. So, there's a little bit of different approaches to it, but you probably should assess, where is my company culture at, and can we go here, or are we going to be those crackpots over there in the corner that, people, like, that's great, can you guys, tone it down a little bit? We got to get some products out to market.
Hey, Mark, to that point, just a question from my perspective. So we all kind of work in engineering minded brands to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys think that design thinking, the phrase design thinking, can be hindering in, should we frame it a different way ourselves, kind of in our own cultures, maybe if it's not as accepted, or we just call it what it is?
It's grown so much over the years. That's kind of the terminology around it. And what I was referring to actually was when I was at P&G, where I think there was a certain amount of resentment that somehow design owned this thing, this process, and it's meant to invite others in. This is a team sport, right? And by labeling it with design, like I used to just tell people, oh, we're just going to have a workout. We're just going to have a brainstorming session. And then you would use sort of the principles of design thinking. So you sort of snuck up on them. I'm in a very engineering-based culture now at GE, and I don't see as much, sort of questioning around it. I think we are a little bit of those guys over there that are doing something different. But once we get people engaged in it, we had a great session a couple of years ago called Engineer of the Future. Cool. So it was all engineers, and we were just like helping them figure out, how to get back towards what they learned in school and how to, perform a little bit more in that kind of capacity here at GE, because honestly, they had been drowned by a lot of compliance and quality things and filling out paperwork and stuff. And they're like, I don't do engineering anymore. So they really embraced it. And I think what we called it didn't really seem to matter as much. So again, I think it's one of those cultural things is sort of know your audience kind of thing. And you can sneak up on people, or you can just sort of, be bold and just call it what it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've heard from some of the panelists and other hangouts how it's really important to even position yourself as a facilitator, so that other departments don't have to step back and figure you're doing the innovation, right? Yeah. And then also make sure that they realize that, yes, you have this expertise, but expertise can come from anywhere, right? And, be sure not to label the design thinking or innovation department as the only people doing innovation, right? And so I thought that was a good reminder, the facilitator, even though they have all these other great characteristics the design thinker needs that we've addressed earlier, still making sure to position it so people don't say, great, you're doing that, I don't need to. So
I don't think that we actually say design thinking that much. I think we're saying, well, let's look at it from the user perspective. Yeah. There's the technology perspective, the business perspective, what have you. Let's bring them all together and play in the same sandbox, as it were. And people seem to appreciate that. It's just a mindset. It's not, and in fact, a lot of the methodologies are very similar to engineering discipline. They're very similar to, scientific method. What do we believe? How do we determine whether we're right?
Yep.
So Deborah, can I ask you a question? Is it at Bose, does it feel like it's more of integral to your process? Like it's just the way you guys do things?
I wouldn't go so far as to say, oh, we're perfectly blended. I would, we definitely reach out with love, care, and compassion to all of our partners. We hold workshops. We sort of give our services, like we'll have people come to us and ask for help, and we'll just say, oh, there it is, the dog.
You can put your Post-it note up. We're always ready for that.
We were warned. But anyhow, I taught a class at Bose, and anyone was welcome. And from that, people just learned, and we were more like, we're here to help. What have you got going on? We're just going to give you a different way to approach the same problem. And that seems to be working.
Deborah, I got to give you a great kudos there for staying focused through all that quick transition.
Through the dog.
I wanted her to pick it up and show us.
Clearly a great design thinker yourself. Versatile, open-minded, anything can go. So anyway, Pharrell, can I call on you now? Are we good? What roles would you say complement design thinking, and how?
I think that's a great question. And to everyone's point here, I mean, design thinking isn't just in the design department. You can be an accountant and use these methodologies. You could be in supply chain and use these methodologies. For me, I think obvious answers are marketing and business and creative and, kind of the brand building aspects of product. But it's not siloed to any one organization. And like we said before, I mean, the more you can collaborate and get a group of people together, really frame that problem and have the best solution for the user, those are the roles that complement it, in my opinion.
Yeah, excellent. Well, this has been an absolutely engaging dialogue. Again, I really want to encourage everybody listening in to go and put your questions or vote on your questions in the questions and answers tab. We will take them in just a few moments. I also would like to invite you to visit our website, www.altitudeinc.com, for more free, valuable resources. We have many other hangouts that are on there, along with other valuable resources. Also, our next hangout, you can register for that on the homepage, which is in April with United Health, DataQuest, and LPL Financial. It's Lean Startup and Innovation. Is it working? So please encourage you to go to altitudeinc.com. And with that, what I'd love to be able to do is have us start to do a wrap up. So if each of the panelists could go around and you can repeat what you've already said, but what are maybe the top couple takeaways that you'd really like the listeners to have from what's been said today? And Mark, why don't we start with you?
Okay. I think you could tell from the outset, we're very passionate about empathy and building that into the process, and really deep, and hearing those stories from users and using that in our process. I think it's really, even in my past roles, it's the key to sort of getting great insights. Is you really have to walk in their shoes. You have to sort of understand that a little bit. So I think that's a really big one for us. I guess, I'd mentioned the creative confidence before. It's easy to try and talk about just, taking risk, and it's so easy. It is not easy. It's not easy in certain environments, again, in big corporations that are sort of, they're beholden to their processes. And to do this takes a lot of courage. And so when we run teams through this, we talk about that. How can you take steps towards this, and even just next week, one little thing, just like Deborah mentioned, improv, just by saying yes and accepting somebody's idea and doing something with that. Our chief designer says a lot of times, if you, it would be really great if you could be genuinely excited about someone else's idea. That it doesn't have to come from you. I think those things would be really great.
Excellent. Farrell, what would you have to say that you want people to be left with?
Yeah, I mean, I personally have a passion for storytelling. I think the more you can kind of document the journey of the design process, from the thinking and the research all the way through to the commercialized product, if you can tell that story to the end user, and whether it's a hit you in the face kind of communication, or it's just subtle, the user's going to appreciate that. They're going to appreciate the brand value, will probably appreciate that on the back end. So for me, everything kind of hinges on that story, on the outcome as it kind of comes through commercialization. And we use it too, when you think about what the Innovation Lab is, we're a function within Eastman that really helps the design community try and understand why materials matter. So we're not trying to go out there necessarily empathizing with the user. We kind of work with the design community through that design thinking process. And then we look at the material subset to say, okay, based on the things that you want that user experience to be, do we have materials that can complement that type of experience? So that's how we're trying to use it and internalize it within our own company and kind of build the capabilities ourselves. But that story for us is everything. We love to tell that story, and we partner a lot with the design community to do that.
Excellent. I think we all wish we were great storytellers, right? It's always definitely a challenge. I may just be taking an improv class soon, so we'll see. I'll let you know, Deborah. I'm bold enough. So,
Yeah.
Deborah, what would you add?
They're great fun. So thanks for leaving me with nothing to say.
Oh, come
on. So just building on, yes, everything that they said, just take that as gold and put that in the bank. But with respect to some procedural and process things that you can really start now, for example, look just at your communications. The way that you communicate with everybody is a user experience, is a design thinking moment. I've seen the most horrendous emails, just an email that's 12 paragraphs long, and then the person's upset that nobody read it. Little things like that. So that's building this gradual awareness of you in your life. And then the storytelling, we've really started getting heavy into videography. So taking video, getting the end user on the big screen with our stakeholders, saying, do you feel this? This is their mouths saying this. And we do try and drag people into the field, and a lot of engineers, you might guess, are reticent. What am I going to do? I'm in somebody's house. I feel awkward. And we give them a job. We're like, here's your little clipboard and you're taking notes and you don't have to talk to them or anything. And it's just take the baby steps because they're guaranteed. You're going to, aside from loving it, you're going to achieve success. You will find out some good stuff. And it works. If it didn't work, I would not have a job.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's exciting too. And I have to tell you, all three of you, really fabulous input. And it's really good to hear everybody really aligns, right? I mean, I think it's pretty consistent in terms of what's needed to be successful with design thinking and to be a design thinker. As you've heard today, just for the folks out there, is, design thinking process, it's iterative, flexible, focused. And you've heard a lot about collaboration between designers and users, really putting the users first, making sure we have empathy, right? As we've talked, Mark, I loved your story that we talked from GE Healthcare. That was wonderful. I think we'll all remember it. And really, a design thinker needs to have the DNA, right, to think about the user first and think about the user's behavior and really be open-minded, like we've talked about, flexible, collaborative. I think I heard bold, many, many different things that we've heard. Passionate, I think, Deborah, you had said. And, the process is evolving, right? We need to get to that winning solution or service. But I think what's really key, right, is to remember you continue doing iterations, experiment, or observations, insights, and really allow that empathy for the user to help drive you, right? So again, I really, really thank our panelists, and we're going to get to everyone's questions. But again, as a reminder, we have Farrell, which I have to do Will Farrell, so I say it correctly, Farrell, thank you, from Eastman. And we have Deborah from Bose, and we have Mark from GE Healthcare. Really, really excellent insights. What I'm going to do now for the folks listening in is I'm going to jump over to the questions, all right, of your questions. And what we'll do is we'll take the ones where we have the most votes first. So I have one here, and if the panelists could, if you'd like to answer it, great. If not, I'll call in someone and put them on the hot seat, but I'll try to not do that. Okay. So just to start, we have one here that Gabriella had sent in, which now it just moved. Have you had experience designing an organization using design thinking? Had experience redesigning. I missed it. Have you had experience redesigning an organization?
If I understand that correctly, yeah, and it's funny. I have a friend named Gabriella that worked with me at P&G. I hope maybe it's not her. When we were at P&G, our head of design, who actually wasn't a designer, she had a marketing background. Her name was Claudia Kochka. Used it to redesign the design organization. She's like, I want to take an approach like it's a prototype. I'm going to put people here and put them in these roles and see if it works. And if it doesn't, I'm going to iterate and I'm going to try it a little different way. So I think you can. I think if you looked at how your organization is structured and how you team people together and how you operate, I think you can use these principles. I mentioned it a little bit before too. Is a lot of the sessions that we run are focused internally on the teams. It's how do we develop a vision? How do we work better with the rest of the ecosystem around GE Healthcare? So I think it has a lot of stretch capacity if you sort of challenge yourself and just look at beyond products as prototypes. You can prototype an organization. I think you can.
Yeah, great. What I'll do is have one or two panelists answer each of them because we have a lot of questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Okay. So the next one is, how have recent developments in brain functioning, artificial intelligence, and parametrics altered design thinking?
Wow, that's a tough one.
So
Deborah.
I'll
Go
try.
for it, Deborah.
I will try. So we do know, because I keep looking at anything on fMRI studies and what's going on in the brain. I love it. We do know that storytelling, for example, hits certain centers of the brain. We do know that the brain is structured in neural networks, which has facilitated natural learning, natural language processing in computers. So what we're trying to, what I think will be coming, and this is just based on general reading, not any stuff that I'm doing right now, but the way that humans interact with humans is becoming a model for the way that humans interact with machines. And you see this in the robotics field, which again is not a field that I'm in, but I, like Farrell said, you know, I read this stuff. So having a conversation with your toaster, even a negotiation with your toaster, I think is coming. And you may or may not like that.
Don't burn my toast.
That is my attempt to answer that question. I don't know that I succeeded. I know that we're doing a lot more with what some people call big data. However, the definition of big data keeps changing. But incorporating that in just the research phase.
I think as we see smart connected IoT, you know, that area growing more and more, we're going to see a lot more of this, you know, with the artificial intelligence and all happening too, you know, pulling in design thinking.
Yeah.
It's definitely changing the landscape of the idea space we have to get into, you know, because GE's on a big push towards digital and Internet of Things. And so we have to operate in that realm.
Yeah. What I was going to say is just, and again, Eastman kind of plays on the peripheral of this, but we work with so many designers across the industry, across multiple industries and different areas. And, you know, the Internet of Things here, it just goes back to show that like design thinking in its industrial sense was making a thing. And I think now it's about making an experience. And so how do you start with that experience, whether that experience starts digital and then turns into tangible and then goes back digital, you know, but you're mapping out what you want the user to do, and you have to make it kind of seamless for the user. And I think that's just different, right? It's disrupting industries. I mean, look at the car sharing industry and riding industry and 3D printing, you know, in some ways, in some areas has been disruptive, not in others. But, you know, I think there are things that we just haven't even imagined yet, but design thinking is going to enable, you know, Alexi from, I forget if it's Amazon or Google.
Amazon.
So, okay. You know, but I mean, I'm fascinated by her. I don't own her, but, you know, she's
annoying, by the way.
Just, you know, you can talk into the air and turn your music on or order beer, you know, like that's just kind of crazy. And so I think there's a whole new world of crazy coming upon us, and experiences that we didn't know we wanted yet.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question, which comes from Ron, how has design thinking improved business outcomes? So what impact does it really have on companies?
Oh, since it's quiet, I'll talk a little more. Forrester did a report on user experience or user-centered design outcomes, and I apologize, I did not see questions in advance. So there's one on the return on investment for the basic empathy generating user research, and it's like the highest return on investment that they've seen. So I think that once companies start seeing these numbers, it'll be embraced more at a very direct, low level. Once you have design thinking and user-centered design, you have your use cases that are most crucial, really prioritized.
Yeah.
So this thing that, especially in this, when I was in the more heavily in the software world, this thing that every engineer hates called feature creep. It keeps that to a minimum, which is incredibly cost beneficial, both in terms of timeline, time to market. I think, Mark, you referenced slow down now to go fast later. I think that is money in the bank.
Yep.
I'll just make a comment also, because I want to make sure the panelists are speaking, not me, but if you do go to altitude_inc under work, we have quite a few case studies. And like the one on Margaritaville and DeWalt, those are clearly talk about, frankly, the revenue that's generated through design thinking efforts and how they've had an impact. There's also many others. So that might help answer that question.
Yeah. And I don't have like the success rate data or anything like that, but I do feel like if you're framing the problem correct on the front end, like Mark was kind of saying, well, everyone kind of said, but you know, the probability of a product succeeding when commercialized has to be greater than you just kind of shooting from the hip and getting product out there and hoping the market adapts it. So that's feral. That's no data and research. That's just, I feel like, what I've seen out there.
Yeah, when I worked at P&G, our leader used to famously say, "I'm from design and I have no data." That said, I mean, we get measured all the time, and so I think it's important in terms of trying to understand that impact. But I think another expression our chief uses is, "Why wonder when you can know?" So if you do the research up front, you're going to have a greater amount of confidence that what you're building, the consumers actually want. Instead of you guessing and sort of saying, well, hey, here's the next evolution of this thing. I'm going to assume that they want this. And then you're going to get disrupted by somebody else that had a greater insight. So it's definitely worth the investment. But can you track it? Yes, you can sort of after the fact. A lot of things contribute to the success of a product, though. So design thinking is probably one part of it. But if it's that early upfront part where you really drew out a really awesome insight and it drove the process, then I think it's worth it.
Excellent. So we're going to do questions for about 3 more minutes. If we don't get to all of them, we apologize. The next one here, again, vote for the ones you want to make sure we get to. The next one here is, how do we get design thinking and associated critical thinking and its application included across all of education, from K to 12 through to higher education? That's a great point, right? How do you get it in people's DNA and understanding when they're little?
I can take a little stab at this. So I sit on the board for a startup educational body called Ether. It's headed by Owen Foster, John McCabe, Tom Gaddis, all top educators out there. And what they're trying to do is really, they saw a gap in design education. They've worked at SCAD and elsewhere. And, so it's somewhat a little bit, they're trying to promote. So first of all, they kind of created this thing called Shift Camp. And if you haven't checked that out, it's awesome. And it's, you go out in the wilderness and do design thinking, essentially, but without technology. We're a little technology heavy these days sometimes. And so it's getting back to just working with your hands and collaborating and doing a lot of the things we've been talking about today. But then they're also working a lot in the Southeast, they're just starting up, but trying to get into those classrooms, and they're the facilitators. They're kind of teaching the teachers, where public education has been limited in some areas. I think teachers are looking for opportunities to grow STEAM programs. Hopefully that continues. Putting the A back into STEM is hugely important, I believe, and definitely something also that Eastman's very much behind. And so I think, hopefully going forward, we'll see that continue, whether it's with our government or if we're choosing to do that state by state. But definitely, I think that the maker labs, the more that industry can or communities can put maker labs into schools and just celebrate kind of this way of thinking and not just script the learning experience so tightly, that only few can succeed. I think that would be better. Sorry, that was long and kind of around the wheel, but.
I just like to add a plug for citizen schools. That's something I did some volunteer work. I taught some seventh graders on design thinking, essentially.
Cool.
And these programs, it's insanely successful. So you can go in and teach anything that you want. And it's a great program, so I'll plug that. I believe NASA sponsors Odyssey of the Mind, which is a thing that really encourages design thinking. And I'm sure there are other organizations.
Yeah.
Great.
I'd say to all the design thinkers out there, just get involved with your local community and help, build that capability early with kids.
Great points. So we're at the top of the hour. I'm going to do one more question and then we'll wrap. So how can the less creative agency domains, account, delivery, analytics, et cetera, be more present and participatory in a design thinking engagement?
I'll grab that one because one of the things we like to do in sessions that we run, we ran a session last year for our legal team. We ran one for our quality organization. We like to say everybody has their own unique superpowers, and when you sort of embrace the process, they're just going to come at it from a different angle. There's sometimes people that have a little bit more analytical mind are really good at framing things up and looking at a wall of all these crazy ideas and consolidating that down to something meaningful. And that's their unique superpower. So we love having, HR people in our sessions or people, the lawyers, because they have a different eye on things. So I think, again, this is not just an activity for designers. So I think when you invite them in and they embrace the process, and you trust the process, you're going to get great things just because of that diversity.
Yeah. I mean, innovation needs diversity. If you had a room of all the same people, you'd be a boring brainstorming session.
Yeah, it's an echo chamber.
Absolutely. I mean, definitely great ideas come from everywhere. And with that, we're going to wrap the panel by saying thank you to Mark from GE and Deborah from Bose and Pharrell from Eastman. And I had to hesitate because I want to make sure I'm pronouncing the name right? So, but honestly, excellent insights. Really appreciate everything. I apologize to the folks who submitted questions that we did not get to everything. You're welcome to go to our website again, altitude_inc. There's quite a few resources there. Hope that helps, or reach out to us. Again, thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.